this video, we're going to discuss what chart types are appropriate for quantitative variables. When you start with a quantitative variable, you can create the chart directly and you do not have to create a frequency table first. To examine the values that one quantitative variable can take, you'd create a histogram. Whenever you want to examine the relationship between two quantitative variables, you can create a line chart or a scatter chart. These are the types of charts we'll learn about for quantitative variables in this course. Firstly, the histogram. It shows what's called a frequency distribution for numerical data in the form of a column chart. However, it is different than a column chart because it is used for quantitative variables. It will show the distribution of numerical data by creating categories with the numbers that we call bins. So if you imagine creating a histogram for ages, you would have to define the categories you want to put the numbers in. So maybe between 0 to 10 years old, and then from 11 to 20 years old, and so on and so forth. You would then count the number of people that responded that fall into each of those categories, and that would be turned into the height of a bar. We're only going to learn about one type of this chart, a basic histogram, and how you could tell the difference visually between a histogram and a column chart is that in a histogram, the bars must touch each other. There can be no gaps. Line charts are the first type of chart we're going to learn for two quantitative variables. These charts are used specifically to show trends or patterns over time. So one of the variables can be anything. The other variable has to be related to time. These can be displayed in a single line chart or in multiple data series if you have multiple variables that you want to show changes in over time. In order to use this chart, time must be one of the variables and the time periods need to be evenly spaced. That means if you have data collected weekly, monthly, yearly, etc., you need to stay consistent with that time frame. Essentially, you would just make a line that shows over those periods, like weekly, monthly, yearly, how the other variable changes over time. The generalized version of that chart is the scatter chart. A scatter chart shows the relationship between two variables where the two variables can be anything. So a line chart is the version where one of the variables has to be time. In a scatter chart, it shows the relationship between the two quantitative variables where the variables can be anything. In order to create this chart, you have to think very carefully about which variable is the independent variable and which variable is the dependent variable, because that will decide which variable should go on each axis of the chart. Once you've decided which one is independent and which one is dependent, the independent variable will go on the x-axis, the dependent variable goes on the y-axis, and you simply plot the values of the two variables against each other to form the scatter chart. There's also a special type of scatter chart called a bubble chart, where you can use the size of the marker to show the value of a third variable. So you're actually plotting in 3 dimensions. For our purposes, only a histogram is appropriate for our data set, so please watch the subsequent video to learn how to create a histogram in Excel.